Hi, thank you for attending our talk on Perspectives on Moral Judgment. I'm John Kruschke. Fritz Breithaupt will join me a bit later, and we'll be describing research done by the Moral Perspectives Research Group, which has been supported through the Remak Seminar Award from the Indiana University Institute for Advanced Studies. We all have a strong sense of right and wrong. For example, if we see somebody drowning, we have a spontaneous urge to help, and we believe that's the morally right thing to do. And if we see somebody rescuing a drowning person, we admire the rescuer and believe that's a virtuous act. The domain of morality extends beyond compassion into the realm of sexuality. For example, this painting of Adam and Eve puts fig leaves over their private parts as a gesture to sexual modesty. In fact, my euphemism with the word private parts is itself a concession to this moral norm. Moral judgments differ across people. They differ across cultures and within cultures. Across cultures, for example, there's the case of honor killing. Now, in this situation, it's not that one culture has morality and the other doesn't. Even cultures with honor killing have a very strong sense of morality. It's just their particular type of morality focuses on the honor and sanctity of the family. Within cultures, within American culture, for example, gun control has of late been a moralized issue. So people on the pro-gun control side emphasize the care and safety of potential victims, whereas people on the anti-gun control side emphasize the morality of liberty. Nevertheless, despite differences across people, moral judgments address universal concerns. Examples of universal concerns come from cultural anthropologists. For example, all cultures have moral concerns about physical abuse. Harm is only allowed in specific circumstances. All cultures have moral norms about marriage and sex. And there are many other domains in which cultures universally have moral norms. Now, these universal concerns are nevertheless shaped or tuned by individual biological predispositions, by situational factors, and by the cultures, the cultural norms. Before going further, we should define what we mean by morality. We do not mean a codified canon of rules that you might find in religion or in philosophy of ethics or in law. Such codes can certainly inform morality, and morality can inform those codes, but that is not the focus of our talk today. Instead, we do mean by morality a description and theory of the feelings, intuitions, and reasons in the sense of right and wrong. The sense of right and wrong makes a distinction between moral versus conventional norms, and of moral norms, there's a sense that they should be universally applicable. So, for example, if I don't wear a tie when giving this talk, that might be a violation of a conventional norm. But if I wear no clothes at all when giving this talk, that might be a violation of a moral norm. The science of moral judgment is informed by many different fields, from sociology to political science and law and philosophy, anthropology, economics, psychology, literature and theater, neuroscience, biology, and ethology. We have time today to describe briefly only a few threads. What we'll do is give a little bit of background and then get into some of the research we've done locally in our own group. An influential contemporary idea in moral psychology is the moral foundations theory of Jonathan Haidt and colleagues. Moral foundations are like moral taste buds. Just as everyone has basic taste sensors, such as sweet, salty, and bitter, the idea is that everyone has a basic set of moral foundations. And just as different people might have different sensitivities to sweet and salty, and different cuisines might have different emphases on sweet, salty, bitter, different people and different cultures can emphasize different moral foundations. According to Jonathan Haidt et al., there are 5 basic foundations. First, there's care or harm. We saw an example of that in the opening slide about the feeling of wanting to save someone who's drowning. Another foundation is fairness. People everywhere seem to be sensitive to the notion of either equality or proportionality, fairness. There's the foundation of loyalty, loyalty to one's in-group. There's a foundation for authority, that is, deference to legitimate authority. And there's a foundation for sanctity or purity. To give you a better sense of how these foundations work, I'd like to show you the Moral Foundations Questionnaire. Here we see the top part of the questionnaire, and I'll just read you the instructions so you can get a feeling for how it works. It says at the top, when you decide whether something is right or wrong, to what extent are the following considerations relevant to your thinking? Please rate each statement using this scale. It goes from 0, which is not at all relevant, to 5, meaning extremely relevant. And then there are many questions. Here I've highlighted some questions that all ask about the foundation of care. So, question 1. How relevant is it whether or not someone suffered emotionally? Question 7. How relevant is it whether or not someone cared for someone weak or vulnerable? Question 12. How relevant is it to you whether or not someone was cruel? There are other questions that emphasize the authority foundation. Question 4. When you're judging right and wrong, how relevant is it whether or not someone showed a lack of respect for authority? Question 10. Whether or not someone conformed to the traditions of society. Question 15. Whether or not an action caused chaos or disorder. There's a later part of the Moral Foundations Questionnaire which gets at these same foundations using a different type of question, where people are asked about more specific situations and then asked to either agree or disagree with those statements. You can take the Moral Foundations Questionnaire yourself at the website indicated at the bottom of the slide. The researchers were interested in how sensitivity to these moral foundations differ across people, and in particular, how those sensitivities differ across the political spectrum. On the horizontal axis of this graph, we have the respondents' self-identified, self-reported political identity. On the left is strongly liberal, on the right is strongly conservative. The vertical axis shows the weighting on the moral foundations, that is, the mean rating they gave for is this foundation highly relevant or not. And there are going to be 5 curves plotted as indicated in the legend on the right, a curve for each of the 5 foundations. And here are the results. On the left we see that for the strongly liberal respondents, they weighed harm and fairness as extremely relevant for their judgments of right and wrong. But loyalty to in-group, deference to legitimate authority, and purity sanctity are weighed relatively low. On the right, for the strongly conservatives, we see that the 5 foundations are all rated more or less equally. This makes a lot of intuitive sense, but what the researchers want to emphasize is that these are universal moral foundations. They're simply differentially weighted by individuals. Now, what are the criteria for foundationhood? How did they identify these 5? Well, Haidt and Joseph scoured the cultural anthropology literature and came up with these 5 as reasonable candidates given the literature and cultural anthropology. However, they say these are not exclusively the only possible foundations, and here are some of the criteria they gave for potential others. First, the foundations should be common in third-party normative judgments. So they shouldn't be rare little concerns. They should happen frequently all the time. They should be culturally widespread across the whole world. These responses, these sensitivities should be automatic, affective, that is, emotional evaluations. There should be some evolutionary model for where these sensitivities may have come from, how they might have been adaptive through evolutionary history. And finally, there should be evidence of innate preparedness. That is, there should be some evidence that even the youngest of us have these sensitivities. And that innate preparedness is what I'd like to talk about next. Please proceed now to part 2 of the talk, in which we summarize some fascinating research suggestive of innate moral senses.